it's going to be part of this, an interactive case study for a film release, because as we gathered this information and started to learn about what was working, what wasn't working, we realized that we were doing a lot of the things, like we just didn't vertically integrate them yet, that a distributor would do, especially back in the old days, let's say 10 years ago, before you had more of like an aggregator sort of mindset with distributors, where you're actually, owning part of the film, because that eliminates what I consider to be a pretty big agency problem in the incentives and where they're balanced and where they're focused. So that will come up later on. But bridging the indie gap, as you see up here, a practical guide. Everybody has sheets on their chair, and we're going to go through these. When I bring up Lizzie, who's here from Story Hive and Tellus, we're going to actually start thinking about this now. We're going to need a filmmaker out there who wants to join us on stage to walk through this with their project. And if at first you're like, oh, that's too much, I don't want to expose I just don't want to do that. Think about the idea of like the hive mind and all the filmmakers in here that can actually help. We already have a volunteer, it looks like. Yeah, or a question? Okay, good. All right, so hold it right. We don't need you down here yet, but we were like, how are we going to get somebody up here? But it was that easy. So good to see that. So let's get started then on bridging the indie gap. And I'm going to spend about 20 minutes or so going through this, and then we're going to do our practical exercise. But hopefully in your mind, you're going through this as we discuss, because it matches exactly to each of the numbers on the sheet. So bridging the indie gap, right? This is some contact information. It'll be again at the end of the slideshow. So this is a white swan. And in Australia, in the 1800s, that's all anybody in Australia thought there were white swans. So there was a saying that said, well, that's about as likely as seeing a black swan. And then, of course, eventually, somebody saw a black swan. And they realized that they had to change all of their thinking around the fact that black swans don't exist, because they did. And everything after that was a world where there were black swans. So this was one of the, and there's a black swan. This was one of the principles behind, there's a great book by a mathematician and economist, Nicholas Nassim Taleb. Does anybody know that name? One man in the middle. Okay, good. You're ahead of the curve here, right? But he wrote a book called The Black Swan, and it's about randomness, probability, serendipity, all through the lens of math and economics. So it's not your typical indie film book. It's a business book, but not a traditional business book. And I have found it to be the best, what I would call self-help book that I've ever encountered, because what it does is it helps you make decisions thinking about, like, so to bring this into a indie film sort of analogy here. So when Kevin Smith brought Clerks to Sundance, and it sold, and it was picked up by Weinstein's, and we all know, and Kevin Smith has turned it into a cottage industry, his own brand, Kevin Smith, Askew Universe, View Askew. That was a black swan, because up until then, people were like, oh, we bring it to a film festival, we do this. And there were some other examples, Sex, Lies, and Videotape. I think Reservoir Dogs, Brothers McMullen comes to mind, where somebody maxed out their credit card, took a flying leap, went to Sundance, because anybody can go to Sundance. And these were, kind of how the articles were written. It's like the model for independent filmmaking was max out your credit card, make a movie, take it to Sundance, sell it to Harvey Weinstein, and then you're set, you're good to go. And that's sort of what the journalists were putting out there. And that's what everybody read. So you saw a lot of people doing that. You saw a lot of films that matched that template. And again, that was a black swan, because we don't read about, we hear the numbers, we see, oh, there were 8,000, number climbs every year, that films that were submitted to Sundance. And there were 8, there's like a very tiny percentage of 1% of the films that get in there. So the first thing that I want to do is just, and this is, I don't want it to sound cynical, but it's more kind of like tough love. Think of it as tough love. That we all in here are not black swans. We're just regular swans. And this guide here is a way to make it work for the standard average, like you've got a film, how are you going to bring it to market? How are you going to try to create a sustainable career? It's not the way that Kevin Smith did it. There's a different way. And it takes time, takes effort, planning, all these other things. So, and this is just a picture. I don't know how much it's not an even playing field. Everybody, you hear a lot of things about how like, oh, production is democratized and distribution is democratized and all, like, yeah, that's great. So now everybody can make a movie. So I'm also a film programmer. So I programmed for a lot of years at the Seattle International Film Festival on a 1-year hiatus right now. I just took over as the director of programming for the Portland Film Festival and did some pre-screening for Sundance. So I've seen a lot of movies and a lot of movies that are bad. Most of the movies that I see each year are movies that don't get into a film festival and don't play at a theater near you. And it's sort of like, as the iceberg. Think of the tip of the iceberg as the movies that are here at VIFF, the movies that are at Sundance, and then there's this just giant thing that goes all the way to the bottom of the ocean, filled with other films that nobody ever sees, but people spend a lot of money on and have the biggest hopes and dreams for, obviously, right? And a lot of that is because cheaper production, access to materials, which is great, but then there's so many, so the filter can't handle that, so the filter becomes tinier and tinier, and then if you do get it out, so you put it on Vimeo or through VHX, which was just bought by Vimeo or Amazon Video Direct or wherever you're going to put it out, the problem is, yes, I mean the good thing is people can see it, they can find, but they don't know that it's there unless you've built your audience, you've spent the time, you actually have the budget available for what I call the fourth lap of a 4-lap race that most people think ends after the third lap is finished. So your third lap is not finishing the film, it's not getting it into it, that's not the finish line. The finish line is getting it out to an audience, trying to make some money and trying to set up your next project, maybe get a sustainable career going as a result of that. So just want to sort of keep this in your mind that, you're up against a lot of factors that are not in your favor, but that doesn't mean that you can't succeed on a level that's, it's not going to be like Paramount Pictures or something, but it could be sustainable and it could be, very creative, creatively invigorating, I think is probably the best word. So, all right, so as we talked about, the title of the presentation here, Bridging the Indie Gap. So down here is the land of the day job. And that's where most filmmakers are. I mean, I was in the land of the day job until it wasn't like there was a Smarthouse creative that was out there just waiting to hire me because they're like, oh, Brad's got the skills that we need for this position, this job, this company. I had to make the company myself to be able to do that. And that's kind of the same thing that you are facing as a filmmaker. It's like you have to figure out how to bridge this gap to get up there to a sustainable creative career. And I say, it's still every day, so many hours a day, 7 days a week working on this stuff. So yeah, it's hard work, but I love what I do as part of this. We also do some producing and screenwriting, but it's this middle part here, the indie gap, is what we are. This is like an evolving kind of a living presentation, learning new things every week almost, and trying to convey them as best we can to an audience. You can take them and put them to use for your own projects, in this case film, but this could also be for any sort of creative entrepreneur out there in the audience. And then here are the steps to bridging the indie gap. And we're going to go over these, and I'm sure Maria will make this available. We can put the slideshow, so take pictures if you want, but you'll have access to this. This is not like a closely kept secret. I want you to know about this during the presentation. Please feel free with VIFF's hashtags and everything to tweet if you want. But here's how we go up. And starting there on the left Network and audience development, that's kind of the first thing that we're gonna talk about. I'm not gonna read all the slides for you, but you can see like what is involved here in getting there. And it's a very intentional and practical way to go forward. There's nothing on here that requires some great stroke of luck somewhere to happen, or like, this is like, if you just spend the time, now I'm not making any promises, of course. This is not like, sometimes when I'm doing this, if anybody, I'm sure a lot of people up here have probably seen Magnolia, so I don't want to compare myself to Frank T.J. Mackey, but this is like where you want to be moving toward, but that doesn't mean it's a guarantee, because it has to do with how good the project is, how well an audience responds to it, the timeliness, the zeitgeist, all these other things. But these are steps that will get you closer for sure. So first thing, network and audience development. So you'll see on the page there, this is about figuring out your primary, your secondary audience, figuring out where they get their information, where they hang out online and offline. So there's a big part about connecting online and offline audiences. So here, obviously we're all off, I mean, we're online and offline, I guess, technically, but we're here in a physical space experiencing something. And there's a lot of other people that maybe either wanted to be in that seat or couldn't be in that seat. And think about it for your own filmmaking endeavors. How do you bring that audience into the fold? The audience that wasn't at your screening, the audience that wasn't at your fundraising event, all these, you know, there's a myriad of different applications for that. But this, again, is just going to be an overview, because I want to make sure we have time to go through this with an actual project and walk through that worksheet. So the big thing here, though, is to understand who your network is, who your audience is. I mean, here in this theater, I would imagine it's a lot of independent filmmakers, producers, festival folks. Like, this is our tribe, so to speak. Like, this is, you know, could probably like throw a ball out there, and somebody who caught it would have, like, there would be like a great conversation to be had, I would imagine, with somebody out there. So you cannot underestimate the power of interpersonal, face-to-face connections. That's why, like, I thought it would be a great idea when Maria invited me to do this, to actually come up here and do this. Like, you can't deliver something like this online in a way that's effective, but you can take the materials, the video, the audio, like all these other things, and build out, you know, additional content pools that will bring in more of that audience. So, again, we'll get more into this when we actually walk through the worksheet there. But team building. So there's probably, I mean, it's been done before, like, you know, maybe Pi or Primer. I think, I'm trying to remember name of a great documentary, Tarnation. If anybody saw Tarnation, that was supposedly made for like $300 and edited on iMovie, and I think it was all done by the filmmaker himself. So yes, you can do it on your own, but again, that's a black swan example of making it happen. So what you're gonna need is a team. And this is not so much the filmmaking team, this is really, I'm talking about the team that comes in that fourth lap. Because by the time you finish that third lap, you're gonna be exhausted, you're gonna be like, oh, I thought I was done. Like, now it's not getting into festivals, or it's not getting into the festivals that I wanted it to get in, or we don't have enough followers, or our email list isn't growing like we want it to. And I would imagine probably the reason is because you're not a marketer, or you're not an outreach producer. You need these additional people on your team, and maybe you don't have the budget for it, maybe you do, but there's a lot of ways. If you made a movie, you know, like, how to get out there and talk to people, and, you know, get in-kind favors, all these other things. So you got to look and see, like, where the holes are on your team right now when you're taking your film to the festival circuit. You're taking your film out on VOD, maybe a limited theatrical run if you can pull it off. Like, what are the skills that you don't have? So, like, be very, like, internal looking. Like, give yourself like a hard look and say, like, what do I not know how to do? Who can do it, and who can do it better? Who do I want on my team? Who can help me with this? So that's something to think about, because I would just caution you to not think that you can do it on your own, because I can't do it. I don't think, it's few and far between the people that can do it. So get a good team together, and the best team is going to be the team that complements and fills in the gaps that don't exist currently, either with yourself or with your current team. So something to keep in mind. Now, this is like where things get really in the weeds, I guess is the best way. I need some water, is the other thing. I'm sweating. These lights, so bright. All right, this is my ventriloquist portion of the discussion. So, goal setting and strategy development. So this is not a thing. I'm actually going to sit down here for this. So when you are getting your plan together, it's like writing a screenplay. Like, you're not going to go into it where you're like, oh, I got this idea and this happens, that might happen. All right, I'm going to start writing. And then you get to like page, 7, and you're like, well, now what? I don't know, maybe. And it's most likely because you haven't thought it out and done your plot, even a treatment, a scene outline, anything like that. And that's what this is about. You need the same thing that you had when you were developing your film. You got to take those same principles and apply them to the marketing and festival/distribution plan for your film. So goal setting and strategy development. You want to look at it. What are your goals? Like, why did you make this movie, right? So like, hopefully it's because you had to tell this story. It's not because you were hoping to make $1 million and sell it to Harvey Weinstein at Sundance, because again, like, that's not like, I would say that's like highly discouraged as a reason to become a filmmaker, if it's to get rich and be famous, because that could happen, but most likely it's not going to happen. So what is your goal for, the life of the movie? You made this great movie, hopefully, and now you want people to see it, I would imagine. So how are you going to go about that? So is the goal playing as many festivals as you possibly can and hoping to leverage that, and get distribution, or turn it into, who knows, right? Like, it's good to be on the festival circuit, but you just have to also be aware that you don't want to spend too much money going on the festival circuit, because you're going to deplete your budget before you're ready for the exhibition and the distribution part, right? So set those goals, figure out, maybe it's like you don't even care about the festival circuit because you made a movie that isn't a good fit for festivals in your opinion. So maybe you're going to try to take it directly to your audience and sell it, because most festivals probably don't give you a cut of the ticket revenue. This is like, there's a whole separate conversation about like what, film festivals 2.0, the evolution of film festivals, what that should look like. But for now, that is a revenue source that's not available to the majority of filmmakers. And so you think, how many times do I want to screen this for free versus how many times do I want to screen this where somebody's paying me to watch it? So these are all considerations to think about. And then the strategy. So you want to have your timeline. You really want to be as intentional and, as detail oriented. And I'm not a detail person myself, although like when I care about something, like I get down deep into the details about it. But that's the kind of thing. So it takes discipline to approach this from like what I consider to be like an entrepreneurial or a really business-focused mindset, which doesn't come easily oftentimes to creatives, to artists. But that doesn't mean they can't do it, because like I felt that same way. Like I have a degree in environmental engineering, which I've never used in my life. And then, ended up getting an MBA, which was the last professional degree I thought I would ever, like, I would make fun of it when I was in my 20s. Like, oh yeah, I'll get an MBA. Why would I do that? That's ridiculous. And it turned out to be the exact thing that I needed to get my mind in the space, like to complement, like I said, about team building. So think about it from a personal perspective too. It's like, what can you learn more about that's going to help you? You don't have to be an expert, but that's going to help you speak the language of the people that you're bringing on, or the people that you're negotiating with, in this sort of like the post-festival life of your film. So we'll get into this more with, what's your name, by the way? Who's coming down? Javier, what's the name of your film? Say it again, please. Ah, got it. Okay. So like that's where we're going to go. Like we're going to figure out all this stuff. So right now it's a little bit, ephemeral, but hopefully it's not in your mind because you should all be thinking about like, how does this apply to your film? Of course, I put the clicker way over here. All right. So talking about plans, right? This is not something that I, copy and pasted off of Wikipedia or pulled it from some other article that was online. This is my own, original definition of what I consider to be a digital strategy, a digital exhibition, or like it's not even about film. This is about like you want a digital strategy for a project that you're doing. These are the steps that you want to take. And I also didn't make this up out of whole cloth in my head when I was high or something down in Seattle. Like this is like this. So this is based on experience, but it's also based on research. And again, I'm not going to read it to you, but the important things to pull from here are measurable and specific. These are all things like, because if you just say like, my big goal is to raise awareness about my film. Well, that's a really tough thing to measure because it's difficult to know like how aware people were of your film before you started your awareness raising campaign. So unless you have the money to do a survey and say, hey, how many people know about Road to Eritrea? People would be like, well, it's probably 0%. So you could say like, yes, we raised awareness and our reach on Facebook, right? Which is like almost like a meaningless metric. So, and we'll get to metrics and key results, key performance indicators later. But yeah, don't rely on or look at stuff that a third party is kind of like. It's got to really align with the goals that you set for your film, or else it doesn't make sense. And you're just like following somebody else's plan, or you're following like a one-size-fits-all sort of thing. This will get you at least in the ballpark, so you're thinking about the things that you need in order to do this, what I consider to be in a best practice style approach. So objectives, key results. So we talked a little bit about this, and this goes along. So say you wanted to play 10 film festivals, right? So that's your goal. And that's kind of out of your control. Like you obviously can submit to film festivals, you can research and find out which film festivals are going to be a good fit. So you're not sending it to film festivals that probably weren't going to play it anyway, but are happy to take your submission fee. So, so say your goal is, I want to play in 10 film festivals. And then the objectives underneath that, you would look and say, all right, so if I want to play in 10 film festivals, I'm going to have to submit the film to at least 10 film festivals, right? You're probably not going to have a 100% success rate. So maybe you want to make that a little bit higher. Say 50%, like I would say a good number for 10 film festivals, if you have a good movie and you pick your festivals right, you want to submit to about 35 or so film festivals. And I would personally keep those submission fees, like total amount, to under $1,000. Because I've heard just nightmare scenarios where filmmakers have submitted to like 80 film festivals and then have like come to us and said like, yeah, I could really use a festival strategy. And the first thing we ask is like, well, how many festivals have you submitted to already? And they're like, well, 85 or so, but I could, like, okay, you don't need a festival strategy anymore. Like that, like you've already taken that out. Like that's like the opposite of a festival strategy. So again, but your objective would be, submit it to 35 festivals. And that is something that you can measure. That's something that you can control. You can't control, again, if you achieve that goal, but you can control if you've, I've submitted it to 8 festivals so far, and I got to raise a little bit more money. So you can track your progress to getting toward that goal. And then to extend this example a little bit, that the idea of the key results or the key performance indicators, KPIs, that would be, a quarterly assessment or maybe a monthly assessment to your filmmaking team or to your production, whatever sort of the entity is, and your team, where we stand. So as of today, October 7th, we've submitted to 8 film festivals. We've gotten 1 acceptance, 5 rejections, and 2, we're still waiting to hear back from 2 of them, right? So you can track, and then that'll help inform how many more you want to submit to. What do you want, do you want to fly out then? Because you got to figure out what your budget is to attend the film festival. Is it going to like a big thing, and I haven't mentioned this term yet, but return on investment, ROI. Probably hear this a lot if you work like, again, in the land of the day job. You may hear this and you may be like, again, like these terms, right? But just try to like, I don't know, maybe I'm speaking for myself and projecting here, but I always thought it was difficult to sort of approach creative things from a perspective or a lens that was more about sort of like what's always traditionally been about like widget making, right? But there are a lot of good principles from widget makers that can apply to creative entrepreneurs. And you know, maybe you don't have that sort of firewall in place. I did, but if you don't, great. If you do, try to tear it down, because there's a lot that you can accomplish by, you know, what's the ROI? So your return on $1,000 to film festivals, well, unless you win a cash prize or something, most likely you're going to be a negative ROI. So like the goal shouldn't be like you're not going to make money from film festivals. You're going to get achieve other objectives there, right? So that's, you know, I would say you want to have one goal probably, maybe two at the most, or you could kind of stagger them. So like you have one goal for your festival run, and then you have one goal for distribution. So maybe it's, you know, and it could be tiered again. So it's like we want to sell 60% of the tickets that are available for every screening in our limited theatrical run, and then we want to have a huge, you know, like we want to have a, you know, X number of units moved on the day that the film comes out on VOD, and build into the pre-sale period on that too, in hopes of achieving that. So, and then those all can be broken down into KPIs, into your key results, so you can track them. And this is like, could be its own presentation, like could go really, really deep in here, and we'll go a little deeper with the film example, but you just really, you know, even if you don't have key results figured out, you at least need your goals and objectives, or otherwise you'll go places, or you'll submit film, or you'll like, and you won't know if it's working or not. Like you might feel successful because you went to a few festivals, but then at the end of the run, of the festival run, you're like, well, now what? You know, I didn't have any distribution interest. Well, did you need a traditional distributor? Like I will show you that you may not need a traditional distributor to get your film out to an audience, but it's going to require a lot of research and a lot of effort, you know, to do that, but it's possible. So strategy implementation, like this is like, you got the strategy in place, you figured things out, hopefully you've kicked the tires, you've run it by friends and acquaintances, peers, maybe some mentors, and now it's time to put it all into motion. And it's a little bit more nuanced than just like riding the missile down through the, like you do have more control of it, you know, than slim pickings here, but not a lot, because like once things are in motion, there's gonna be some lag time. There's gonna be a few weeks, if not months, when you don't have a lot of data. And if anybody's used like a VOD service or had a distributor that put something on VOD, oftentimes it can be very difficult to get your numbers and to find out how well the film is selling. And if you don't have those numbers, it's really difficult to figure out how much more to spend on you know, digital ads or social ads, your marketing budget, because you don't know if what you're doing is working. So that's like, I feel like that is one of the great conundrums, maybe a catch-22, and it's really difficult because the distributors mostly, you know, are not, I mean, they're hiring us to do a lot of this stuff, and they're, the budget just isn't there. Like that's not a secret, you know, for marketing. A lot of that is gonna fall on the shoulders of the filmmaking team, of the filmmakers. So again, to go back to the black swan, the clerks, don't expect that there's gonna be this massive P&A budget for your film, because I would say 99% of the time there isn't going to be, and it's gonna come out of your pocket if there is, which isn't a bad thing, but you just have to be prepared for it. So, so strategy implementation is really important, because this also includes revising your strategy based on data-driven, well, not even data-driven, like just based on the data, right? So when you're looking at this stuff, you don't wanna look at your raw numbers unless like it's something like sales, you know, like that's a good raw number to look at. But if you're just looking at like, you know, if you're gauging success by the number of likes or the number of, retweets or things like that, I mean, there are arguments that can be made for the importance of that because it helps spread information to different audiences and expand those networks that know about your film. But it doesn't mean that people are buying the film. It doesn't mean that what you're doing, your content strategy necessarily is working. So bottom line is I would say look at rates when you're doing this stuff. So what are the per capita rates? Like how is your audience growing over the periods that you're measuring, that you're taking these measurements in, that you're tracking your metrics? What are the rates for the things? So try to stay away from raw general numbers or numbers that are delivered to you in sort of a third-party environment, but look at the rates and look at the things that are going to move your goal forward, that are going to move the needle on your goal. And then if you have access to that data, make those revisions. Don't throw the entire strategy out the window because something's not working. Tweak it and say, okay, this one piece isn't working, but maybe it's because we're looking at the wrong audience. We're promoting this to the wrong audience. And we thought it was going to be X, but it turned out that it's Y, and we learned that while we were on the festival circuit. So no distributor is necessarily going to have better information than you will after taking this film out. So again, that's got to be a symbiotic relationship. There's got to be give and take there. And hopefully that's the case if you do wind up with a distributor like that they are willing to work with you to market it, because each of the films out there, I would assume, is very unique. Hopefully it is. So it's not a one size fits all. There's going to be a lot of tacit knowledge that you're bringing to the process that doesn't exist anywhere else except within your team. So that is a really, really valuable asset. So for case studies here. So right now, I'm going to try to just put this out in 3 minutes for this case study because, like I said, it's still evolving. And so there was a film that I watched when I was pre-screening for Sundance in 2014, and I loved it, and I highly recommended it. I filled out the forms and everything. And I was like, oh yeah, this could get into, I think this could play in Midnight or Next. It's one of those kind of films. And then it didn't, and I was like, well, it's numbers when you get down. There's probably a lot of films that could have gone in. It's not a big deal. It'll probably, it's probably a better fit for South by Southwest or Slamdance. Nothing there. And I was like, Tribeca, it'll surely play at Tribeca. Didn't get in Tribeca. And then, I call the producer. I was like, this was March. And I was like, what's going on with this film? When are you going to premiere it? Where's it going to premiere? I'm surprised it hasn't premiered yet. And what she said was, they didn't get into any of the big festivals that they had submitted to, and then they basically ran out of money to submit it to any more film festivals. So I was like, oh my goodness, that's crazy, because I actually thought that this would be a great film for Smarthouse to go out with as our first release. That's how much I like this movie, right? And it had yet to play at any film festival, right? So sort of the way that films are vetted, people were saying this movie, is I don't want to say worthless, but it doesn't fit into our system, right? So it ended up world premiering at SIFF in 2015. It sold enough tickets to move from the smallest venue at the Uptown to the middle venue at the Uptown to the largest venue at the Uptown, the most we'd ever sold for a Catalyst film, which is a program that's kind of like SIFF's version of Next, to use a quick thumb, kind of a comparison there. And people loved it. And it ended up winning the jury prize, the Ferpresky Jury Prize. And then I didn't submit it to any other film festivals because we had worked out an agreement without any lawyers, without where we would take a 25% ownership stake in this film, because then we have an incentive to see the film succeed. It's not just part of our slate. It's not just part of, I was saying to Lizzie when we were outside, I was like, from a distributor's perspective, I'm leaving after the reception tonight to get down because it's screening at the Northwest Film Forum at 10 p.m. tonight. And we're doing one Saturday night, we're calling it Catterday Night Live screenings at you'll see why in a moment. But because I care about this movie so much that I want to be wherever it's screening if I can, if the ROI makes sense. Because say for instance, the DCP fails. And then the Blu-ray fails. and then they can't play it off of Vimeo because the internet connection's down. Who is going to act out the film to the audience? That's how much I love this film, right? So that's kind of a thing that you want to, maybe ask. You're talking to a distributor, say, how much do you love my film, right? And that's one of those kind of things, because I feel like in order for sustainable success to come to independent filmmakers, it has to be this sort of group effort. Like, I'm part of the team. Smarthouse is part of the team. And the movie's called Chatty Catties. And it ended up so what we did is we developed a massive list of venues around the country, our own list. And we wrote personal emails to exhibitors saying, here's why we love this movie. Here's the here's what we're going to do to support the film. So not just oh, this is going to be a great movie for your audience because we're saying it is. We're saying, if you think this is a great fit for your audience and you want to screen it, we will throw X number of marketing dollars behind it. We will do this and this and this. We'll, do a publicity campaign in the local market, et cetera, right? And as it turned out, people were responding. And if they weren't responding, then I was following up with them. And eventually, so this was started in the late spring, early summer. It made its theatrical debut at the Roxy in San Francisco on September 2nd. And it was a week-long run. So do not four-wall a film. I would just say that right now. I can give you all sorts of reasons why not to, but just trust me on this one. Don't four-wall a film because you're probably never going to make your rental back. But so we weren't four-walling. So this was a legitimate program, played for a week, and then it got held over because people really liked it. So it's called Chatty Catties. It's a movie about a woman who lives with her cat, and in this world, cats and humans can communicate. So the cats all have voices, and there's voiceover, and the voices are all done by deaf and hard of hearing actors because the producer and director wanted to offer roles to a community that had nothing to do with them being deaf and hard of hearing. And it works really well for the film, and the timing is really good. And when we've gotten reviews, people they get it. And they're like, this movie is funny, it's unique, we've never seen anything like it. But there's still a lot of people that won't program it, which is fine. But the point is that I am pushing, I am emailing, calling until I get to know. And that's kind of what you have to look at, because you can't assume that people are going to say yes. You can't assume that you're going to get, that thing that you want. But I at least want to hear them say no, because then I know that I have done everything that I can to get it out there. So after it played at the Roxy for 10 days, I guess it was, it opened in Seattle, and we worked out a partnership with a cat cafe, and then worked out a partnership with Hearing, Speech, and Deafness Center. So we've got them on board, and they support the film, and they're promoting it to their audiences, and we're also running ads. And then later this month, it's playing at the Somerville Theater, and then we're still kind of negotiating a few other deals, right? But we're not we're not A24 or well-known distributors, but you don't have to be if you're doing the things that those distributors so it's really easy for a film that gets picked up at Sundance to get Chatty Catties was playing at the Roxy right next door to Yoga Hosers, which ironically is a Kevin Smith film that played at Sundance as well. And so, again, this is something that's sort of developing in my mind about what is really the role of a film festival. And do you need to play so many film festivals in order to get distribution or in order to play theatrical engagement? This is anecdotal, but right now, everything's indicating that you don't. So maybe you're, these are all the landscape is really shifting. So when people say oh, it's a changing landscape, all this is happening, and it's because, there's a new, tweak to Facebook, or there's a new social, that's not it at all. What's really changing is the way that business is done at these levels, especially at the grassroots level, where, independent exhibitors have the agency to make these decisions, but you have to convince them that this is going to be a money-making thing and it's going to be good for their audience, because otherwise it's really easy for them to just, add another screen with the new Star Wars film or something, and it's hard to make an argument against that, financially. So again, it's about trying to even the playing field if you can. And then the final thing, and this is more of a kind of a broad, but we have a couple sort of mantras that we like to put out. One is filmmaker first. So, it really is about you as a filmmaker, you as a creative artist. This one film that you have right now, hopefully is not going to be your only film. Maybe it's your second film, maybe it's your third film. So these films have shelf lives. Like Chatty Catties will eventually like go into a long tail, no pun intended, of VOD distribution, and Pablo is going to make another movie. So it's not all about Chatty Catties. It's about Pablo as a director and this unique vision that he has and how he sees the world. And that's how I hope everybody in the audience thinks about it, is like, it's not about this one project, it's about your career. So think about all the ways, like if you're live tweeting right now, for instance, like that's a way to be positioning yourselves as, somebody at, an epicenter of, an industry event, and, an influencer maybe, or you're at least like putting good information out into the indie film community on Twitter, which can never be a bad thing, honestly. So keep this in mind when you're thinking about like how you're moving about and how you're crafting and positioning your career. That should be a big part of it, is filmmaker first, or getting that kind of umbrella brand established, because maybe your next project is going to be a web series or a TV pilot. You never know. And then the other one is owning your audience. So I can't stress the importance of making those connections with the people who are going to support your next crowdfunding campaign, who are going to buy your film on VOD when it becomes available. So don't think about it as like, how many Facebook fans do we have or something like that, because people can buy Facebook fans. Like, it's not, like, again, like think about what's important to your film. And I would say getting people's email addresses is probably a lot better way to go about, a lot more sustainable way. Because if you think about all the different things, there was MySpace, there was Friendster, there was Ello, there was, there's going to be something after Facebook. Twitter might be being bought by somebody. It's like, these things come and go. They're not always going to be there. But what have been the two things, really, that have been around since the dawn of the internet, say, like the 90s, 95 or so, are web pages and email addresses. So make sure you have a good web page for your film. If you have a short film or even a feature film, I would say don't bother having a Twitter account for that. Use a hashtag, right? This is a little bit more tactical, but the point is you want to own your audience in a way that allows you to monetize, in a way that allows you to connect with them around ideas, because you never know, like maybe somebody in the audience will end up being a collaborator at some point, because you both have like really similar ways of viewing the world. Or like, again, like this is more of a, owning your audience is a bigger discussion, what that really means. But at the bottom line, it means making connections with people in meaningful ways, and not just looking at them as another number on a social account that you're hoping will like or share something. You want it to go deeper than that. And that's, how you can move toward, what we call bridging the indie gap. So now I want to bring up Lizzie Karp, who is with Tellus and Storyhive. And let's go. I found that the lights right here are not as bright and hot. So why don't you sit right there, and then let's bring our filmmaker up. Right here, Javier.
Hot seat. Come on down.
Let's give this guy a hand.
Hello.
Test. And the microphone is working. Just grab that when you sit down.
How about this one? Ooh.
So Lizzie, do you want to say a little bit about Storyhive, or just kind of give the audience a brief?
Sure. I'll be real quick so we can come and talk to our filmmaker.
Hey, thanks a lot. I really appreciate you taking
Hi. Nice to meet you.
the bravery. You got a mic? Okay. Well.
So at Storyhive, we're really passionate about giving filmmakers a platform to create a film, but also to grow an audience, and one that really connects with a lot of the things that you were saying this past hour about having an audience that is sustainable, that grows with you from your pitch to possibly being funded by Storyhive, and then whatever happens next. So we're really excited to keep the conversation going.
Awesome. So now we're going to get into, so hopefully, everybody has the paper there on the chair. Now, I'm not going to be offended if I don't see you writing or you don't break a pen out or something like that, but maybe I would just encourage you to, think about this as like a practical exercise. You can walk out of here, as we walk through with Javier, you can walk out of here with the same sort of information, but for your film. So The first thing we think about is, going through the Indie Gap sort of process there, is your network and audience development. So who is do you think? Well, tell us a little bit about your film first. Why don't we start there? And Lizzie, jump in whenever you want to. Yeah.
This is a real funny co-hosting thing.
Yeah, you talk more. I talk too much already.
Awesome. Hi, guys. I am a pretty pragmatic filmmaker. I've gone through making a few films before, but this would be my first feature, just so you guys get an idea of where I'm at. Low to zero budget, my own financing. I've done features before, a couple features, with a group of filmmakers as a producer. This would be my first directorial film. So, bringing all that to mind, my own pocket and my own group of friends, it's a drama, okay? Set in the Syrian war, okay? And I'm gonna mix story with my pragmatic filmmaker input. So why this? This personally, this is a story that comes close. I used to live in Syria back when I was a kid. That's my personal side of the story. The other side of the story would be the practicality of shooting desert in BC. You can shoot. You could shoot in a forest, but I've seen so many forest movies. I'm saying I gotta shoot something in a desert for a change. So the desert in BC looks like the Syrian desert. They don't have to look, like dunes. It's very rocky desert, and that kind of stuff is perfect. So this is a story about a Syrian man who wakes up in the desert with a concussion, and he's wearing a uniform with no insignias. And the concussion, he forgets who he is, and he forgets who he's fighting for. So he wakes up in the desert in the wreckage of a jeep and a couple dead bodies. And he's wondering, first thing, I'm alive, but I don't remember who I am or who my enemies are or who my friends are. And he's in the middle of the conflict. So first thing, he's got to survive. He's got to get out of that desert. And second thing, he thinks, whoever I find, I won't know if they're out there to kill me or out there to help me. So that sets him off in that journey. Okay, so that sets his first thing is that. Roads of Ithria. Ithria is a small kind of a town in Syria. And it is an intersection road where you can go to any side of the conflict. The Syrian army, or you can go to the ISIS, or you can go to the army of conquest on north. It's a central point. And so he's thinking, the only thing I remember of this is that if I go to Ithria, I'll be able to choose which way I'm heading. As he gets to Ithria, all these challenges happen. He gets bitten by scorpions. He gets attacked by a man who he finds there, helps him, but he doesn't know if he's in favor or against. And at the end of his story, he ends up in Ithria, and he realizes, it doesn't matter who he's fighting for. It doesn't matter who it is. He just doesn't want to be part of this anymore. He wants out. So he sets off to escape the war. And at this point, I'm on my fourth draft, and the idea would be for me to bring it to Vancouver or bring it to a Western country where he is now a refugee. So that's another thing that I'm crisscrossing between him being out in the desert and him being a survivor as a refugee in an urban center. So that's it in a nutshell, Roads of Ithria. And so I'm starting to think ahead now on what you're talking about.
Yeah, and so thank you for describing that. It sounds like a really interesting film.
Thank you.
And a great thing about this, when you think about timing, this is exactly the time when you want to be thinking about these things and figuring out, who you need on the team, how much you need for a budget for the fourth lap, as I'm starting to call it today, and what all of this, how it can inform, sort of the context of the filmmaking. So this is really good. So why don't we jump right into who you think the primary audience for this film would be, and even the secondary audience.
Right.
That's to you, Javier.
Okay. Okay. Well.
But the audience can jump in too and say, like, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? So why don't you take the first stab at it?
Cool. Well, I'm thinking first audiences would probably be people that are interested in war dramas, in character movies. and character movies being not very plot-driven, they're not very broad in marketing. So probably be looking at niche audiences. So probably the people I find at film festivals, the people that want to go see films that are more about characters, more about current situations, like the war in Syria, for example. Refugees. Well, I did mention about refugees. So obviously, Syrian refugees are around the world at the moment, and so, institutions that do help refugees, they may have ways of outreach, or they have their own groups of support, and if the movie will be relevant to that subject matter, so there might be the interest of harnessing their support,
So that primary audience of film lovers who likes stories about war, character driven, where do you think they are? How will you find them?
I don't know.
You're probably like, what you're thinking right now, like, why did I volunteer for this? But this is like first of all, like, you made the exact right choice to come and volunteer for this. But this is how, you really have to think about this stuff. This stuff isn't like we're just like, I'm going to fill out this sheet in 5 minutes before I go to my first festival or something like that. These are hard questions.
I have another kind of question that we ask, our Story Hive team asks a lot about audience is, what do they Google late at night in the dark?
Right. Yeah, probably. Well, war maybe. It's low in the list maybe, but.
War, question mark?
War, yeah.
What is
war.
it good for?
Yeah, exactly.
Question mark?
I mean, it's a war movie. It's more like a character movie with the setting in the war. So it's not exactly a war movie, like the typical war movie anyway. So the question, the primary audience, right? Where to find them? I mean, I would probably go to blogs, war blogs or refugee blogs or war survival blogs. I would probably start finding them and starting conversations with them, Twitter, of course, Twitter is huge. I find that's been super helpful, and you can definitely start conversations with people in Twitter. My co-writer, Cheyenne, him and I, and him especially, is fanatical about every minute of what's happening in the war. It's he's got in his Twitter alerts, oh, such and such faction took such and such city. And it's like, maybe some people may care, but he does, and he's passionate about that, and that's what he's good at. And whereas I'm looking at the side of the humanity on that, who the affected people are, the mothers, the children, and so between the two of us, we kind of piece together a map for who the people who might be interested in this story might be.
Yeah, and real quickly, I'll add that idea of the map, I think, is very germane right here, because there are two services that I would recommend for anyone out there looking to sort of like, you're not sure who the audience might be, but you have some idea kind of what topics or subjects they might be interested in. One of them is Tweet Reach, which if you can put in accounts, you can do trackers, you can do a bunch of subjects and see who's talking about that, what links are being shared. It's really, really effective, but it's a paid service. The one that's free, and this is, it's actually just an Excel template. It's called Node Excel, so NODEXL. It's by the Social Media Research Foundation. And it's an Excel template that pulls data from Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, like a whole bunch of, they're adding platforms all the time. But what it does then is you could take, say for instance, Syria or another keyword, or even to go deeper, put it in there, and it'll give you a snapshot. You can set the time, it won't go all the way back to 2006 or something, but you could say the last 30 days or the last 90 days, however much however much, sort of time that you want to pull, what's relevant. And it'll create a visual network map. So you can see kind of where the hubs of these conversations are happening. You can see who's talking about it. Again, it goes really, really deep. And it'll look very dense at first, but once you know what you're looking for and how to do it, like the patterns, you'll find that, you'll see like who are the Twitter influencers that you want to connect with, and not where it's like, hey, can you retweet this to crowdfund my film? That's not how you do it. Like, it's more like you said, like starting conversations, listening. Like, you can get so much done by listening on social media, probably more than you can. Okay, cut myself off right there, and let's keep going. Got the 5 minute. I'm gonna get the hook here in a sec. So, Lizzie, why don't we go through team building?
Okay, so what are some expertise gaps missing from your team? And then another sub-question that I had thinking about this is for your team members, and you were talking about some people that you're working with, who are they inspired to be like? Like, what do they want to get out of being a part of your project?
Okay. I'm harnessing the people that I've worked with in the past in other films, right? So the cinematographer, who happens to be Lebanese and speaks Arabic, so it was kind of a perfect match. Jay Kamal, he works in the film industry as a first AC pulling focus, so he's already, embedded in the film industry, and that kind of worked out really well. He worked with me in my previous short film, so he's now on board to shoot this feature. So through him, his family members, Arabic family members, part of the elements of the movie are in Arabic, so it'd be perfect in that sense. Where I'm lacking or missing components, finding depends. I can shoot this in zero money and have no stars in this, or have just Cheyenne and a couple friends who are actors, and sure, they're up and coming, but they're no name actors, which is fine, because if I'm going to pay for this with my own cash and maybe a couple co-producers, so be it. But if say a distributor, I attended this morning at 9 the indie distributor thing, and I was thinking, well, Robin from Kinosmith, or Rob, one of those guys, I could just tell him, hey, I have this. Would you be interested in maybe developing it with me, or maybe perhaps you can, find a suggestion, give me a suggestion on what avenues I could distribute this, to be marketable, perhaps. I think the production side is okay. I'm good with the whole production and getting it done. Getting the movie out there is a whole different world, and that's probably.
Yeah, so focusing more on the post and the marketing and the festival pathways, and that makes a lot of sense. And part of this is sort of like built on the traditional SWOT analysis. So your internal, you're looking at your strengths and weaknesses internally on your team. And then for the external, the opportunities and threats, there aren't so many threats because it's like it's a pretty unique film. Like, they're not going to have a lot of competition necessarily around this. But what are those opportunities? And I think you hit those pretty well with like distributors or producing partners, people that can help get the word out. Maybe you find a champion in the refugee blogosphere, or somebody, a journalist. Maybe somebody placed at the Guardian, or somebody that really digs this. Because I think it has that potential. And then the other filmmakers. So unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get through all of this in a way that like is really super effective. But why don't we do the big, like, what's your goal? Let's go there. Let's get two objectives.
Okay. Well,
one objective.
One objective, yes. Get the movie out there to as many eyes as possible. I think that would be I'd be happy if the movie would be seen by more than just my mother, and so I think that's my main goal. And if festivals are a way to do it, great. But if festivals are just a waste of money, then no festivals. Put it on short of putting it on YouTube for free, which I've done. I probably put it on find a distributor who is willing to work with me for the money I have, and for this to see how far he or she can push the movie to. And I think that's what's out of my hands, basically.
Yeah, right. So in wrapping up. Lizzie, if you wanted, like, we can go off script here.
Yeah, just to
Just
wrap
kind of-
wrap it up really
Why don't you
quickly.
close it out?
I think that what's really compelling about you and the way that you pitched this to this room really quickly is that your story and how you're going to make this film and the team that you have is incredibly compelling. And there's a lot of talk around films like Tangerine and a lot of other pieces where the story of the film and making it gets them more attention in a lot of ways than the film itself. Your film is, the idea is really strong, but don't lose your own story.
That's a really good point too. When you think about like ancillary materials, behind the scenes, all those kind of things, I think Lizzie really nailed it there with kind of being aware of that and making sure you capture those things.
Or I can send you an email, Brad, after this.
Oh yeah, no, of course. I'd love to hear more about it. Well, I can't go back to the contact information, but Lizzie, how can people get in touch? Thank you. And Lizzie, what about?
Just at Story Hive, and you can bug us. We'll be here all day.
Yep, and Javier, where can people connect with you on Twitter, or
Thank you, Brad.
how can they connect with your film?
What's your website?
Yeah, do you have a
How do
website?
people find you?
Yes, I do have a website, and it is roseofithria.com. I have it right now on Wix and all that, but yeah, Rose of Ithria. How do you spell Ithria is the big question, you know, so I might change the name to just Rose or something.
I think that's a good
But
idea.
no, I don't know. Rose of Ithria, I'll put it out there. If you look for me, it's Javier Badillo. You can look for my name online. I probably worked with a few of you guys. I'll be here in Vancouver. Javier is with a J, Badillo is Badillo, Badillo. Javier Badillo. Yeah, anyways. Say
All
hi to
right.
me, I'm just
Thank
outside.
you.
Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for